from the East-West Center in Honolulu, and mahalo to viewers around the world for tuning into today's EWC Seminars Live webinar, The New Geopolitics of Afghanistan. Our bi-monthly EWC Seminars Live series is designed for multinational journalists and informed audiences to connect, inform, and source media stories. My name is Liz A. Dorn, and I'm a program coordinator here at the Center. It's my pleasure to introduce today's panel of think tank and policy experts exploring how South Asia, China, India, Pakistan, and Turkey are likely to react to the Taliban's return to power, the prospect of emboldened militant Islamists, mass migration, and the future of diplomatic and strategic relations in the region. Michael Kugelman is the Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia, with a particular emphasis on Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Originally from Hong Kong, Neva Yao is a fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia and a researcher at the OSCE Academy in Kyrgyzstan. Her work focuses on China's foreign policy, trade, and security relations with Central Asia and Afghanistan. Harsh V. Pant is head of the Strategic Studies Program at Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi and a professor of international relations at King's College in London. Hussein Haqqani served as Pakistan's ambassador to the US from 2008 to 2011 and is widely credited with managing the partnership during a critical phase in the global war on terrorism. An expert on radical Islamist movements, he is currently director for South and Central Asia at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. Murat Samir is professor of political science and international relations at Koç University in Istanbul. His research addresses questions of democratization, polarization, ethnic conflicts, and political Islam. And now I would like to take a moment to share our webinar protocols. Today's webinar is on the record, recorded on Zoom, and made available on YouTube for viewing and sharing. Viewers, your microphones and videos are turned off. Each panelist will speak for up to 8 minutes, and Q&A will take place after panelists' remarks. To submit a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen and specify if there's a particular panelist you wish to answer. Join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag EWC Seminars Live, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EWC Seminars. Check our website for webinar information, registration, full speaker bios, and YouTube links at www.eastwestcenter.org/EWC Seminars Live. From there, you can also access information about other professional opportunities, as the Center offers a diverse array of media, leadership, and educational programs. Finally, I am delighted to introduce today's moderator, Nirmal Ghosh, the U.S. Bureau Chief for the Straits Times, Singapore's top English daily newspaper and a leading publication in Southeast Asia. Prior to this, Nirmal has covered geopolitics across Asia as a foreign correspondent in Manila, New Delhi, and Bangkok. He is also an East-West Center alum. With that, I'll hand over the program to our moderator to offer brief contextualizing remarks. Nirmal?
Thank you, Liz. And it's a pleasure to see all of you. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Now, it would take all day and all night to cover the storied and often very bloody and certainly fateful history of Afghanistan. But we do have to start somewhere. So we'll start with 20 years ago. And I would bet that most, if not all of us who were adults at the time, remember where we were and even what we were doing when 2 hijacked planes crashed into the Twin Towers in New York on September 11th, 2001. Separately, a 3rd plane was, of course, crashed into the Pentagon, and a 4th crashed into a field in Pennsylvania when passengers and crews resisted the hijackers. Now, the mastermind of that act that killed close to 3,000 people was apparently Osama bin Laden, the Saudi leader of the Al-Qaeda terrorist group, which had already struck at the US or US-associated targets before that. Most recently then in 98 in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, and in 2000 when they hit the American guided missile destroyer USS Cole in a suicide attack in Yemen, killing 17 American sailors. Now, in the wake of 9/11, The United States demanded that the Taliban, who were in power in Kabul, hand over Osama bin Laden, which they refused to do. So the United States invaded and kicked out the Taliban. Osama bin Laden got away, but was found 10 years later in Pakistan, and the US sent a team in 2011 and killed him. The US continued to fight the Taliban and remnants of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, though meanwhile it also invaded Iraq in 2003, something which is seen almost universally as a blunder of disastrous proportions. But the US stayed 20 years in Afghanistan, making it the country's longest war. It came at a cost of over 5,000 American service members and contractors killed, close to 1,200 service members from NATO member states in the US coalition, 66,000 Afghan national military and police, almost 50,000 Afghan civilians, a number that tragically rose by 10 only recently in an American drone strike. Among the civilian foreigners dead have been aid workers and journalists. So it has been an almost unending steady carnage with only interregnums of stability. However, a generation of Afghans was able to grow up with a sense of hope and not having experienced the rule of the Taliban. And all this came at an investment that is placed at around $2 trillion in reconstruction, in training and equipping the armed forces of a government backed by the US and its allies, and in setting up institutions and so forth. But the war also went on through 4 US administrations, both Democrat and Republican, and eventually with a new strategic rival in China occupying Washington's attention and an American public fed up of endless wars halfway around the world, the US started talking directly with the Taliban. And to cut another very long story short, on April 14th this year, President Joe Biden announced a complete US withdrawal by September 11th. The 20th anniversary of the attacks that started this particular violent and bloody chapter. Now, the withdrawal became a precipitous scramble for the exit. Most of Washington has been focusing on post-mortem, so there are enough of those. The facts are that the Taliban swept back into power quicker than anyone predicted, though we did hear at a Senate Armed Forces Committee hearing earlier today, that is September 28th, here in Washington, that top US generals believed it was advisable to leave around 2,500 troops in Afghanistan to prevent what we are seeing now, which means their advice sounds like it wasn't taken. So the Afghan armed forces and the Afghan government collapsed, and now we have the Taliban back in power. The US, despite being able to point to its massive evacuation, has been defeated and in fact humiliated in many eyes in the region. Pakistan has gained tactically. Pakistan allowed Taliban leaders to base there. It was Pakistan that facilitated their attendance at the talks in Doha. India, which backed the former government in Kabul, has lost tactically. Now, what happens in Afghanistan does not occur solely in a vacuum in Afghanistan, and neither does it stay in Afghanistan. Of course, 9/11 was the biggest example. Soon after 9/11, Singapore detected similar plans by the Jamaat Islamiyah for attacks in Singapore. The JI, which had direct links with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, was already in advanced planning for simultaneous truck bomb attacks on targets in Singapore, including the US Embassy and other Western interests. Southeast Asia remains a target broadly for ambitious jihadi terrorists. In the years since 9/11, we saw the Bali bombings, attacks in Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur, and who can forget the bloody long siege of Marawi in the southern Philippines. Let me quote from Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong from an opinion piece very recently in the Straits Times. Quote, 2 decades after 9/11, the fight against terrorism is far from over. Extremist terrorism has metastasized. Digital media has amplified the poison. Al-Qaeda was succeeded by the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which has lost physical territory but continues to operate, including online. Lone wolf attackers have self-radicalized on the internet. Some are jihadists, but others espouse other violent, rabid ideologies. He went on to add, now that the US has left Afghanistan, we will have to watch closely how the situation there develops, whether groups based in Afghanistan will again threaten our security, and where else new fronts of terrorism may emerge. Now, law enforcement agencies across Southeast Asia are very much on the alert against terrorist groups potentially emboldened by the Taliban's takeover and finding roots in ungoverned or only loosely governed spaces in Afghanistan. Indonesia, for example, is home to the world's largest Muslim population and has constitutionally guaranteed religious freedom for minorities. Jakarta also worries about a spillover effect. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi met in early September in Doha with top Taliban official Sher Mohammad Abbas Tanikzai to urge that Afghanistan does not become a breeding ground for terrorist organization and activities. And India is worried as well. One of the most powerful men in Kabul now is Sirajuddin Haqqani, head of the Haqqani network, who is wanted, by the way, by the FBI. India remembers very well the July 2008 bombing at the Indian embassy in Kabul, which killed 58 people. That is the security dimension. And then there is the geostrategic dimension, and of course, both overlap. But in that dimension, apart from India's interests and the Pakistan security establishment's role in the Taliban's survival and return to power, there is also the question of Russia, China, Iran, and Central Asia. And not to forget Turkey, which, by the way, also provided security at Kabul airport in the last days of the US withdrawal. Now, forgive me if that was long-winded, but it really helps to have some historical perspective rather than just focus on the last 1 or 2 months. There is far more than that. If 9/11 changed the world and that happened because of one man and his organization sitting in Afghanistan, the Taliban's return to power in Kabul is certainly going to have very wide ramifications. So to look at geostrategic implications for the future in the region, in Asia, let us turn to the panel. And may I start with asking you, Michael Kugelman, to give us a rundown on how you see the reactions and implications and concerns broadly for South Asia.
Well, thanks, Nirmal. Much appreciation to the East-West Center for including me in this very timely discussion on Afghanistan. I think this is a very important and overlooked question to ask, the one that you've posed, Nirmal. There's been a lot of discussion, and for good reason, over the last few weeks on what the Taliban takeover means for Pakistan and India. And I know that two of our speakers will be focusing on that, but I think it's important not to overlook the smaller South Asian states as well in this story. I think that the most immediate concern for the South Asia region's governments is getting their nationals out of Afghanistan. Most South Asian countries, excluding Pakistan, which has kept its embassy in Afghanistan open, have already evacuated the bulk of their citizens, aside from those that have voluntarily chose to stay. The South Asian states, again, excluding Pakistan, which is an outlier with so much in this context, most of the South Asian states, though, will take a wait and watch approach before making any decisions about how they may go about recognizing the Taliban government. Aside from Pakistan and India, there have been very few countries in South Asia, very few governments in South Asia that have offered any type of public comment at all about Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover. They're being very cautious. Certainly a major concern, as is the case with all regional players, both in South and Central Asia, is the security situation. Will the Taliban be able to consolidate its power, or will there be a new armed resistance and civil war? Will terrorism get worse? Will the threat of terrorism get worse in Afghanistan? These are the types of things that the South Asian states will be watching for before they think about questions related to approaching or recognizing the Taliban government. And I really think it's unlikely that any South Asian country other than Pakistan will recognize the Taliban government anytime soon. The region's relations with the Taliban government will be informal, unofficial, and relatively limited, restricted to engagement on areas like negotiating the evacuations of their citizens and the delivery of humanitarian supplies. All this said, though, I think there are two immediate concerns that South Asian states will have and do have following the Taliban takeover. The first certainly relates to terrorism. And I think that, Nirmal, you took us through the context very well earlier on. Certainly there's a very real concern that the Taliban takeover will lead to a more conducive environment for international terror groups to reconstitute themselves and pose greater threats in the region. The Taliban takeover has already galvanized jihadist actors in Afghanistan and beyond, raising the threats of more attacks outside Afghanistan in the South Asia region. And certainly for Pakistan, this means the risk of more attacks from the Pakistani Taliban, which has its main leadership based in Afghanistan. And the group carried out more than 30 attacks in Pakistan in August alone. For India, this means the risk of attacks from groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which have had a presence in Afghanistan, and certainly recent Taliban messaging vowing to advocate on behalf of Kashmiri Muslims will further galvanize these India-focused terror groups. But the terrorism risk applies to other South Asian states too. Pakistan is not the only regional country, not the only country in South Asia to have experienced problems with Islamist terrorism. Bangladesh has as well, to a lesser extent, along with the Maldives, and also Sri Lanka to a modest degree. And I think the concerns here are twofold. One is that the Taliban takeover will inspire jihadist networks in these countries to stage attacks. The other concern is that radicals from these countries may travel to Afghanistan to take advantage of Taliban control, get involved in militant activities there, and then return home where they could try to wreak havoc. And this is nothing to sneeze at. No country in the world has sent more fighters on a per capita basis to Iraq and Syria than has the Maldives. So there's a history there. There's also a history of Bangladeshi militants going to Afghanistan. This was happening back in the 1980s. And then they came back to establish new extremist organizations in Bangladesh. So the threat of terrorism emerging from the Taliban takeover is not restricted to India and Pakistan. Second concern for the region relates to issues of trade and connectivity. I think that one of the signature features of South Asia is its lack of integration. Poor roads, insufficient electricity grids, a lack of regional trade. The small states of South Asia are keen to strengthen connectivity. They see it as a pathway toward more prosperity and development. But long-standing tensions, mainly because of the India-Pakistan dispute, have constrained cooperation and by extension, integration. The Taliban takeover will add to these geopolitical tensions that constrain more connectivity and integration in the region. Since much of the South Asia region will not recognize the Taliban government, the region won't really have a partner in Afghanistan for potential connectivity projects. Instead, we're likely to see more of what has become a pattern of fracturing when it comes to regional cooperation. So that means that sub-regional groupings like BIMSTEC, an organization that comprises India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, but not Afghanistan and Pakistan, will continue to gain momentum. And on the other hand, we'll likely see Pakistan pursue connectivity projects with Taliban-led Afghanistan, along with China and perhaps some other states in the region, in the Central Asia region, maybe Russia as well. And this all means that SARC, the main South Asia regional organization, which comprises all 8 South Asian states but have been completely ineffective for years, will likely become even more irrelevant, even though the smaller South Asian states, especially countries like Sri Lanka of late, have voiced hope of getting SARC to work better. Before I conclude, just a few quick words about 2 other major concerns that we hear a lot in the context of implications of the Taliban takeover. One is mass migration, the other is narcotics trafficking. These are actually not region-wide risks. I think they apply, I know they apply more to countries bordering Afghanistan. In the South Asia context, mass migration most impacts Pakistan, which has hosted more Afghan refugees than any other country over the years. Refugee flows to Pakistan will not be as high as they would be if the war were still going on in Afghanistan, but 2 triggers, fear of living under the Taliban and economic stress, will ensure that refugees continue to come to Pakistan. Pakistan does not want more Afghan refugees, but more are still entering. There's some risk for social instability as Afghan refugees in Pakistan often face discrimination, including from the government. They're often accused of having ties to drugs and terrorism. Islamabad has often accused Afghan refugees without merit of being linked to the Pakistani Taliban. And so with the Pakistani Taliban having stepped up attacks in recent weeks and with the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan likely to lead to more Pakistani Taliban attacks, Afghan refugees could face growing amounts of discrimination. As for drug trafficking, the Taliban claims it's going to ban poppy production and bring an end to the drug trade. But that's hard to believe. A powerful, entrenched illicit industry won't go away so quickly, and especially with so few incentives to end it. In a country with a collapsing economy, the drug industry helps boost a lot of livelihoods, and especially as the Taliban will not be in any position to craft an economic recovery plan, doesn't have that type of experience. Pakistan has been particularly hard hit by the Afghan drug trade as some of the main trafficking routes go right through it, but other South Asian countries, especially India, are impacted by it as well. So I will end there. Thank you.
Michael, quickly before I let you go, just one quick question to you. None of the big powers have an interest in radical Islamic terrorism emerging out of Afghanistan, neither China nor Russia, of course, not the US, not India. Surely there's some convergence on that between all these powers. Is there a space in which the US can perhaps work with Russia and China? Or is that too much to expect of Washington?
Yeah, and I think given the diplomatic realities, so to speak, I think that may be too much to ask for, especially because the U.S. or the Biden administration has essentially announced that the U.S. has departed, and its remaining goals in Afghanistan will be relatively narrowly focused. Certainly, one will relate to maintaining the so-called over-the-horizon counterterrorism capacity, the ability to maintain an ability to engage in counterterrorism activities without troops on the ground. But it does seem that the U.S. intends to depend on existing U.S. military facilities in the Middle East. As we know, there have been efforts to explore basing agreements with some countries bordering Afghanistan. But I think that there's more reason to believe and hope that the regional players themselves, without the involvement of the U.S., would try to work together to deal with the terrorism threat. Not every country in the region agrees on what the biggest terrorism threat is, but I do think that there is some convergence on the issue of ISIS and ISIS Khorasan. That is one terrorist group that every country in the region, including Pakistan, is very concerned about and views as a threat. So I think that's the one area to look at.
Excellent, thank you very much. Ms. Yao, you have a fascinating perspective which is rarely heard, certainly here in DC. Could you elaborate on China's concerns and relations or equations with the Taliban? And there is also the question of China's equation with Russia as well, vis-a-vis the Taliban.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to the East-West Center. I'm joining today from Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. It's early my morning, so good morning to everyone. So in this opening remark, actually, before I turn to your question, Namal, I actually want to go through just briefly how has China responded to the Afghanistan situation since 15 August, because I think we need the context of, what has China been thinking and how has China reacted? Has it been professional? Has it just been, kind of a snapshot reaction to what's going on? So there are a few things that have been quite consistent from the Chinese officials, is that China has been asking the Taliban since 15 August to establish an inclusive government. So what China is thinking about is that a lot of these areas in Afghanistan are ethnically diverse, and there is no proper governance that can be spoken of unless there's an inclusive government that would include different ethnic groups and different religion. And then China has also been very actively, and this is the area that a lot of international media has mainly focused on, is that China's been asking Taliban to cut ties with all international terrorist groups, and most importantly of all would be the East Turkestan movement. Despite Taliban coming out a couple of weeks to actually have told China through a Chinese state media that there are no more members of East Turkestan movement within the territories of Afghanistan. But actually, a number of members of the former Afghan government have actually said that there are East Turkestan movement members in Afghanistan. So I think this confirms, largely the relations between China and Taliban as really not very warm, despite China's various strategies to kind of build this friendship with the Taliban in the past 10 years, it hasn't worked, and we shouldn't exaggerate this kind of friendship. China has also been consistently pushing for a regional effort to deal with all the problems that are coming out of Afghanistan, and most importantly through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And lastly, it has called Taliban to establish good relations with all of the neighboring countries. And actually, this is an aspect that many Chinese scholars have considered as, the key for stability in Afghanistan is for the country to have good relations with its neighbors, particularly the Central Asian states, because they perceive that for Taliban to really change their political regime and to be more integrated with the broader region, Central Asian states are and should be the prime focus of Taliban and not South Asian states, which the Taliban has more complicated relations with. And I also want to just talk about 3 kind of interesting observations from monitoring China and Afghanistan in the past month. So just before 15th August and, largely, early this year, China used to always say that they want Taliban to establish a stable and productive Islamic policy in Afghanistan. And this Islamic policy emphasis was actually repeatedly in officials' Chinese discourse for a long time. But the last days that this appeared in a Chinese official statement was the 16th of August, one day after the fall of Kabul. And this is largely, it is very likely that because right after the fall of Kabul, China had to very quickly work with other regional leaders like Qatar and Turkey. And this speech of asking Taliban to have a good Islamic policy doesn't make sense to other states. And it is not something that other states are asking for. So it was, China basically realized that the demands that they were having for Taliban were way too huge and that they had to tone it down. And this has since vanished in the official Chinese discourse. And the second interesting observation is that we have to remember that China is managing the Afghanistan situation both domestically and internationally. The Chinese public has a huge interest on Taliban and on what's going on in Afghanistan. And some of the statements that Chinese officials have been putting forward are actually very conflicted. So on the one hand, officials wanted to present a Taliban defeated the US kind of narrative, that US is a loser kind of image that goes along with all the other kind of narratives that China's been putting forward. But on the other hand, the Chinese public is not okay with officials saying all these nice things about Taliban, because the word Taliban for an average Chinese person is a very known term associated with terrorists and warlords and things like that. And this is something that now the Chinese government is trying to reverse. And back, I think about 3 weeks ago, there was even a trend on Chinese social media where people were asking about, oh, what is the Taliban? And they were saying all these, nasty things about the Taliban. And then people were actually asking the government, why are they meeting the Taliban in Tianjin? These are terrorists. And these content were actually later deleted. And it's funny because in the past 2 weeks, one and a half weeks, Chinese officials actually changed their tone about what they say about the Taliban. So there was a clear shift, for example, that in public speeches, the word Taliban is no longer mentioned. Chinese officials now are saying the new government in Afghanistan or just Afghanistan. So precisely because China is managing this on both sides, we need to understand that sometimes when China says a certain thing, a lot of it could be directed towards its own domestic audience, which actually cares about what's going on in Afghanistan. And the third observation is that initially China wanted the US and allies to actually deal with Afghanistan. So that's to do with the refugee issue and also to investigate the war crimes committed by the US, because that goes along with all of the other anti-US narratives that China has been having in the past few years. But this has changed in the past 2 weeks, actually, is now all about regional effort and basically just asking US allies, US and allies to stop economic sanctions in Afghanistan. So I think with a lot of different kind of new political events, China immediately reacts in a very irrational way. And then later on, they scale back their demands because they realize that this is not realistic. And this is, again, repeated in this fall of Kabul case as well. So if I go to your question, which actually were quite long ones, so I would just address perhaps the China-Russia take on the region. So from what I've heard, actually from policymakers and eyes on the ground, is that China doesn't want to take the lead in recognizing Taliban as the legitimate government. It actually has been asking Russian officials to do that first, so that China can follow as a second kind of country to recognize the Taliban. But the Russians have basically said no. because the Russians are not interested to actually engage in Afghanistan so quickly. You know, they have bases and forces on the Afghan border in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So Russians' goal is mainly to contain the effects that can, you know, go to Russia through the Central Asian borderlands. And this has, you know, Russia is very competent in doing that. So it doesn't need any kind of diplomacy or, you know, politics, you know, with the Taliban just yet. Whereas China is the one that, you know, has, you know, these immediate demands to deal with the Taliban, you know, be it East Turkestan movement, be it border issues and attacks on Chinese projects that are just, you know, across the border. So China is actually running out of instruments to engage with the Taliban. So I realize my time is wrapping up. So I'll just stop here and we will continue this discussion in the Q&A.
Thank you for that. Can I switch now to Dr. Pant? If I may turn to you, how is India reacting to the Taliban's return to power, and what is the future for India-Afghanistan relations?
Thanks, Nirmal, and thanks East West Center for having me as part of this conversation. For the last 2 decades, the timeline that Nirmal very succinctly laid out, 2 things happened. One, I think it allowed India, as far as India was concerned, that it allowed India a certain degree of predictability on the Western frontier, because American military presence was there, and of course, eventually a friendly government in Kabul, which sort of decreased the pressure that often emanates on India's Western frontier from Pakistan, and that also meant that as in, you know, this is last 2 decades have also been the time when India's foreign policy horizons have widened. So in a sense, India could invest towards its east. So the whole logic of the Indo-Pacific, the fact that India could engage with its look east or act east policies more substantively. It could think about those strategies. It could think about a more expansive role in a part of the world that is increasingly becoming central to India's foreign policy imagination. That aspect became much more apparent in terms of how New Delhi started looking at its foreign policy priorities as well as a part of its engagements. So I think what has happened now has put that under pressure, at least temporarily, if not permanently, with what has happened in Afghanistan and America's withdrawal, and the way it has happened, the way Taliban are back in power. And I think it impacts, like Michael and Neva, both were talking, you know, how it looks from the region. It impacts India also in a sense, very, very directly, and it is slightly strange, you know, when you think about these questions now, that, you know, one of the questions, Nirmal, you raised for Neva was, that there is a degree of consensus on terrorism, and I think this is something that you asked Michael also. I mean, we all know that terrorism is a problem. We all know that Taliban's emergence would lead. I mean, these are issues that, you know, that were always there in the public domain. That if Taliban come back to power, this is going to happen. China would face pressure in Xinjiang. Russia would face pressure in Central Asia. India would face pressure in Pakistan. In Kashmir, and of course, Pakistan would internally get more fragmented. But look where we are. So it clearly shows that rationality is not something that works in international relations. You know, you can have very rational observations, but it can lead to suboptimal outcomes. And so I think for India, I think it impacts India at 3 levels. One, of course, is at the wider level that we have talked about. Global jihadist networks have, of course, gotten a boost, and they will, India's internal security comes under pressure, and that is something that was very palpable in the 1990s. India may have better defenses right now, but that is certainly Indian security planners should be worried about. And of course, then you have this idea of what, you know, Pakistan supported groups are likely to do. We have heard about LAT and Jaish-e-Mohammed, but I think this is about Kashmir, and that is about, you know, what happens beyond Kashmir, and those perpetual questions will continue. And I think the third, which is, I think, an interesting aspect here, which is China-Pakistan axis that has been getting sharper, and with Afghanistan or Taliban in Afghanistan, that this axis gets its own strategic depth. Not only Pakistan gets one, but China also gets one. So if the present trends continue, and if China is slightly, from New Delhi's perspective, is beginning to play a more important role in Afghanistan today, or at least trying to, and compared to say in the 1990s, it will have implications, of course, if there is enough stability in Afghanistan to move forward with the kind of ambitions that China is talking about, from infrastructure to connectivity to trade and to mining and all that we often talk about. Of course, this is all of this is something that China had also promised to the Ghani government, but nothing much came of it. So we can see, with a more pliable government in Kabul via Pakistan, what happens. But I think this is going to be directly impacting on India, given the recent deterioration, a dramatic deterioration in Sino-Indian ties, and India having to manage China along the border, India having to manage China on the Pacific or on the eastern frontier. And I think this adds another layer of complexity to that already very, very turbulent relationship. And of all the regional powers, that we have heard China, we will be hearing about, of course, Turkey, and then perhaps Mr. Haqqani will talk about Pakistan. But I think of all regional stakeholders, India perhaps has the least expectations from the Taliban government. And that we have seen also in terms of the outreach. India has had very limited outreach. There was some limited interaction, but it did not yield any dividends. And in India's position has always been that it's unlikely that the Taliban are going to fundamentally alter either their ideological predisposition or their operational realities on the ground. And I think in that sense, India has been proven more right, because if you recall, August 15th and thereabouts, this narrative was being talked about, that somehow Taliban 1.2 have morphed into Taliban 2.0. That somehow we are going to see a different Taliban this time, that somehow we are going to look at, a more inclusive government. Niva talks of, she talked about China trying to say inclusive government. But I mean, this is those regional stakeholders that are talking about inclusive government. It's interesting that if Taliban were really interested in having an inclusive government, they could have easily given it with the Ghani government. If the negotiations were going on, if the inclusivity was part of the deal. And then, of course, you had the Panjshir resistance. If inclusivity was what Taliban wanted, the way Panjshir resistance was handled just a few weeks back could have been handled in a different manner. And I think now that you see the pushback from Tajikistan, you see pushback from Russia, there is a reason for that. That I think some of that has also changed. The narrative has changed. And the Central Asians that were at one point, Russia at one point, which was much more optimistic about Taliban 2.0, it has suddenly given up those ideas. And I think Niva was absolutely right, that Russians from a very optimistic position have now moved to a very, very cautious position on the Taliban. They are not going to come out and say, well, we are going to recognize Taliban anytime soon. And I think that puts a lot of other regional countries in the mind. So I think there is a larger issue about India and in how India looks at it. There is a continuity in India's view, and I think there are going to be a whole host of challenges. But from India's perspective, the most important question is, which is tied with India's engagement with the international community, is that the question of leverage. How do you use the leverage which at this point regional stakeholders, international community has, whether it is to do with humanitarian assistance, whether it has to do with funding, whether it has access to resources, whether it has to do with the larger issue of recognition. How is that legitimacy used? Whether we can use that judiciously, whether we can use it in a manner that allows Taliban to behave itself and to allow a regional order to emerge where all stakeholders have a voice, where some kind of inclusivity, some kind of regional integration perhaps becomes the norm, because that's the only window of opportunity regional stakeholders have and the international community have. And I think that's what we have seen in India's engagement, both with the Russians in recent weeks, as well as with the Americans. When the Indian Prime Minister went to the US, you had the Biden-Modi joint statement, and you also had the Quad joint statement coming out. So I think there is through that prism, India is working in answering some of these questions that have been with India in the past and will continue to be with India in the future. Thank you.
While I have you on, just very, very quickly, were there any sort of, was there any disappointment or rethinking in India after the way the US left Afghanistan? Was there any commentary? Has there been any doubts about, hewing too close to the US, for example? Just curious about that.
Yes, I think there has been, I mean, not in the strategic sense that this is all doom and gloom, but I think it has raised certain questions about, the way Washington makes certain decisions. And I think one can also, although this is not part of the conversation, one can also tie it to this AUKUS deal, right? Australia, US, and UK deal. So there are questions about the future of India's engagement in the wider Indo-Pacific with the US. And I think the question that is increasingly being asked, how sensitive America is to India's western frontier, because if Indian concerns on the western frontier are not taken into account, then India's role on the eastern frontier on the Indo-Pacific becomes a bit weaker, that India will not be able to leverage itself as effectively vis-a-vis what is happening in the Indo-Pacific theater. So I think those questions have emerged, but the larger theme here is how do you enhance your engagement with like-minded countries to a point where even such tactical decisions are made in a manner which have limited strategic consequences. But I think India can take heart from the fact that not only India was surprised, but some of America's closest partners were equally surprised, both by American withdrawal from Afghanistan as well as by the so-called AUKUS. So I think that leaves India no worse off than it was before. But I think those questions have certainly been raised.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks for that. Hussein Haqqani, may I turn to you now for your usual masterclass on what we should expect going forward after these developments in Afghanistan?
Well, thank you very much. And thanks to East West Center for inviting me. Let me just begin by saying that first, the Taliban have not changed, and I don't think that they will change, at least in the foreseeable future. They are a totalitarian ideological group. Their great strength is their ideology, and it is unlikely that they will give up their ideology for international recognition or international assistance. Second, it is also a reality that Afghanistan will need assistance moving forward. So how does the international community take advantage of its advantage in having the ability to provide the necessary assistance, food, medicines, and resources for Afghanistan in influencing the Taliban is going to be the big question over the next several months and possibly years. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan is heavily invested in the Taliban. It took a lot of blame over the last 20 years for supporting the Taliban. Its own position is that we did not support the Taliban, we just acknowledged them as a reality. But almost nobody else out in the world really accepts that position. Everybody says Pakistan supported the Taliban. Pakistan hosted most Taliban leaders and their families, provided Taliban fighters with medical facilities, etc. So Pakistan will not be the country that puts pressure on the Taliban beyond engaging with them consistently. And that will be very similar to what happened in the 1990s when Pakistan was the only country that had diplomatic relations with the Taliban. Pakistan's argument is that we cannot afford not to have a relationship with the country right next to us. It's our neighbor. We have an overlapping ethnic population with them. We have tribes that live across the border. And so therefore, we cannot completely seal that border. On the other hand, Pakistan has built a fence along that, much of that border, which basically is the reason why there hasn't been a massive flow of refugees into Pakistan so far. So Pakistan is going to try and stop the refugees. Pakistan will still continue to make the narrative efforts that it has always made, which lead to a lot of confusion about what is the reality. For example, even over the last 20 years, while almost everyone knew that the Taliban operated out of Pakistan, the second Taliban Amir was killed inside Pakistan. Pakistan is the country that facilitated the talks with the Americans and produced Taliban leaders and flew them to Doha for the talks. Yet Pakistan continued to maintain that ambiguity about its relationship with the Taliban. It would like to do that also in the future, but it would also like the issue of international recognition of the Taliban to be resolved quickly. It was expecting that Russia, China, and Iran will recognize the Taliban sooner, and then as a result, Pakistan would be able to also recognize. None of that has materialized, but it could take a few months, and Pakistan's desire would be that it should not take a few years. It should be very clear to everyone that Pakistan's strategic vision starts with India and ends with India. Pakistan looks upon India as an existential threat. Pakistan sees all irredentist and separatist movements inside Pakistan as somehow tied to India. And Pakistan's efforts in Afghanistan were always about India, meaning trying to deny a relationship between Afghanistan and India that could encourage various ethnicities and nationalities within Pakistan to demand respect for their identities at the cost of what is known as the ideology of Pakistan. While Pakistan will say that it opposes terrorism, the fact is that Pakistan's definition of terrorism is very different from the rest of the world. In fact, every time the UN has tried to come up with a definition of terrorism, Pakistan has always been with those who say the definition of the West and most other countries is not acceptable to them. So where will we see things go? Well, I think that Pakistan will continue to engage with the Taliban. It will not, it will say that it finds certain Taliban behavior objectionable, but it will not object to it beyond a certain level of interaction with the Taliban. Pakistan sees this as a victory, and it's not about to squander its victory. Pakistan will continue its efforts to try and convince Americans, Europeans, Chinese, Russians, and Iranians, as well as the Central Asian countries, to recognize the Taliban. Pakistan will also try to make sure that humanitarian assistance and international assistance continues to flow into Afghanistan so that Afghanistan does not become a burden on Pakistan. The only situation in which Pakistan may be forced to reconsider all of this is if this drags out longer. This time, Pakistan would not let it drag on as long as the last time, when from 1996 to 2001, no other country except Pakistan established diplomatic relations with the Taliban. The Saudis and the UAE recognized the Taliban government, but then it was only the three countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, that recognized the Taliban government. So Pakistan this time will make a greater effort to try and get others involved. And Pakistan does have a very close partnership with China that it intends to try and encash in this respect. If, as I predict, the Taliban will not change fundamentally, then there will be a lot of talk about inclusive government. We saw that even in the 90s, from the fall of the Najib government to the rise of the Taliban. And then subsequently, after the Taliban took over, there were many proposals floated, efforts made, a lot of diplomatic toing and froing, but really nothing came of it. In the end, I think Pakistan will be stuck with the Taliban, and the rest of the world is going to be a lot less welcoming of the Taliban than it seemed likely even a few weeks ago. How will Pakistan deal with it? Well, I think Pakistan will continue to engage with the Taliban. It will try to persuade them to modify their behavior a little bit, and at the same time, ask the rest of the world to keep giving them time. Pakistan does have some terrorism concerns relating to the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, but I think, again, Pakistan is willing to accept some losses at the hand of the TTP and still not break its ties with the Afghan Taliban.
quick question for you as well before I let you go. We have talk in DC about sanctioning the Taliban. Do you think sanctions will make a difference? Sanctioning the Taliban, for example, if they do not allow full freedoms to women and so forth, would sanctions make any difference to the regime's calculus?
Well, I think that sanctions will make a difference to Pakistan more than they would to the regime in Afghanistan. There, the Taliban are used to living on less, and they will just spread the misery across Afghanistan. I think that the Taliban's interest in narcotics trade is also stands revived. It's very interesting that currently there's a famous pro-Taliban narcotics kingpin by the name of Bashir Nurzai in an American prison. And many times the Taliban have recommended or suggested an exchange between Mr. Nurzai and an American by the name of Mark Fredericks, who is being held hostage by Sirajuddin Haqqani's network. So that means that the Taliban have less qualms about making it obvious that they do have a relationship with at least some narcotics kingpins and smugglers. And so, in a way, they're also giving a signal that, you know what, we may not need that much of money in international development assistance. Also remember, when the Taliban government was recently formed, all those who were actually involved in the so-called peace process in Doha, they have been marginalized. Mullah Baradar, although he's been designated deputy prime minister, really is not effectively in charge of anything. Even the two spokespersons have been reduced to just being spokespersons and nothing more. And the people who are really in charge of the government, which includes 17 out of the 33 cabinet ministers that was announced in the first phase, 17 of them are UN designated terrorists. So the Taliban are actually thumbing their nose at the Americans and the international community. But Afghanistan has changed. The people of Afghanistan have changed. And will they allow the Taliban to completely shut the country and make it into a hermit emirate? I think may not be that easy. And the sanctions may enable some resistance within Afghanistan, not necessarily armed, but political, to actually challenge the Taliban, provided Pakistan can be persuaded to drop its support for the Taliban.
Thank you for that. Professor Somer, last but most definitely not least, you are also in a place whose perspective is rarely heard. Give us a wide perspective on what does the US exit from Afghanistan look like from there, and what lessons should we have learned?
Thank you, Nirmal, and thank you all the other speakers before me. Pleasure to be here. I think it's been a few years since last time I talked at EWC. And it's interesting to reflect on how much the world as well as Turkey has changed since then as well. I will try to take a broader perspective, and I think we do need to take a broader perspective to make sense all of this. I think I will do my best. And then, of course, I will also say a few things on Turkey's perspective and how it may be shaped in the near future as well, what Turkey's interests are, etc. The way all this, the withdrawal from Afghanistan looks like from Turkey, and also what it really means for the world, I think we have to reflect on the fact that it more or less, at least psychologically, implies the end of the post 9/11 world. This is the kind of world that the United States tried to shape after 9/11, and also the US public opinion and the majority of the world, Western public opinion, interpreted the events, I think, more or less are coming to an end. But we don't know whether we have a new paradigm, new perspective. We do need a paradigm shift, but we don't see it. I think the hasty withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan, like everywhere else in the world, especially in the Muslim world as well, didn't look good from the point of view of US power in the world, but also the capabilities of the Biden government. I think everything that's happening right now in Afghanistan raises broader questions such as the future of Islamism in the world, the future of secularism, but as well as democracy. But this is not just about what's happening in Afghanistan, but also what's happening in the US with the Biden government, for example. We have to remember that Biden government came after a very populist Trump government with authoritarian leanings, and the Biden government's performance will, I think, send very strong messages to the whole world about, I think, the strength of democracy, for example, and we have to think about that. And this did not necessarily look good. I think, especially more security-minded commentators in Turkey, including close to the government, have interpreted this the type of withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan also as an implication of US withdrawal from the Middle East, and some kind of a power vacuum as well that other states will try to fill in, of course. Just a few remarks on how the Western public opinion interpreted after 9/11 Afghanistan. I think the most important concepts were Islamism versus secularism, and ethnicity and religion. So we have interpreted everything that happened in Afghanistan from these through these lenses. But let's take a longer historical perspective. The US is not the first and probably the last superpower that quote unquote failed in Afghanistan. In 19th century, Britain twice had the same fate, right? And then the Russians or the Soviets, and then this time the US. Empires tried to control Afghanistan for their geostrategic interests, and they became more successful if they knew how to work with the tribal politics in Afghanistan. So we, I think in our discussion as well, for example, we mentioned ethnicity, religion. Yes, Afghanistan is a very diverse, of course, country, but is it, I'm not sure whether the right term is necessarily ethnicity rather than tribal politics. And that was a very important issue. And rather than religion versus secularism, I think I tend to think that nationalism is the most important concept. I think the same was in Iraq, for example, when we think about the underlying reasons for grassroots support, societal support for ISIS in Iraq, rather than religious fundamentalism, I think Sunni nationalism is a better concept to understand to that type of support. And similar things we can also say about the Taliban. Of course, it is, especially for a Turkish person, a Muslim Turkish person, it's very important for me what happens in Kabul, for example, in terms of secular rights and freedoms, and because that will have a psychological impact in Turkey as well. Having said that, when we look at Afghanistan as a whole, probably we have to think about the support for Taliban and what are the reasons for this. And here, again, tribal politics and knowing how to work with tribal politics, as well as nationalism here, I think is the most important concept, because at the end, and this was part of the discussion in Turkey as well, At the end, Taliban, yes, a radical Islamist force, but fought against a foreign power, right? Against a foreign invasion, and that's very important here. So empire versus sovereignty and nationalism, I think, are the most important issues. Coming to Turkey, Turkey also has a long history with relations with Afghanistan, all the way to 19th century, but also to the foundation of the republic. To predict and interpret the Turkish foreign policy in the future, now in the future, I think one important factor we need to take into consideration is that Turkey has entered a period of transition of power. We don't know this actually when and how this will happen, but as you know, that this 19 years long period of Justice and Development Party, and now in a coalition with a nationalist, radical nationalist, perhaps far nationalist party, is coming to an end. And the opposition is gaining power, and the opposition is a more secular, pro-secular opposition, and it is a coalition, and it is gaining power, and Turkey is having economic problems right now as well. And now there will be some elections and some transition of power, exactly how, we don't know. But of course, the foreign policy perspective of the new government is an important question to ask. What exactly it will be? It will be more pro-secular, but thinking about Turkish foreign policy, Turkish interests in Afghanistan, we can talk about maybe 4 factors. One, geostrategic. Maybe less important because it's not, Afghanistan is not that close to Turkey after all, but Russian influence in Afghanistan, Chinese influence in Afghanistan, these have all, especially Russian, I would say, has implications for Turkey geostrategically, and that's something that Turkey would like to balance. The second important consideration is migration. To prevent a mass influx of refugees or migrants. There was very escalated concerns last month, which have subsided to some extent because the number of refugees have not increased. But Turkey has close to 7 million refugees or immigrants, should say, from Syria as well as other parts of the world. And this is more or less what the maximum that the country can really take. So Turkey will try to have policy to really manage that. The third one is economic. And here, I think this is what drives the recent Turkish policy the most. That to some extent, I think here there's an opportunity. Turkey sees an opportunity here, especially for Turkish construction companies at a time when there is actually really the economy really needs this kind of this boost. And finally, ideological. An Islamist government in Afghanistan and Turkey having good relations with it will have an impact on social relations and also the ideological prospects, outlook of Turkish government and Turkish society. So a pro-secular government will probably take this more seriously, and I think will work more closely with Western allies in this respect. I think it will be in closer cooperation. I think the foreign policy of a new government will be more humble in its outreach and foreign policy ambitions. It will probably move back to a more inward-oriented it will not be, it will still have, I think, will be an important player given Turkey's economic interests, etc. But in its global outreach, regional outreach, I think it will be a little bit more humble. The current Turkish government has also, I think, in that sense, consolidated its foreign policy goals. So here, I think I will just not to exceed my time. Turkish government will work with all the other governments in the world. We'll see what the other governments will do. We'll look at also the relation, the United Arab Emirates versus Qatar equation here. What will happen to that? And I just end by saying that I think here it's important in the media as well, how we interpret everything that's happening in Afghanistan will be, I think, important.
Yeah, I think I'll come round to you on that. That's an interesting question you raised, but we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A and we have some questions already. So circling back to you, Michael, I think because you actually very aptly mentioned Maldives and Bangladesh. So there's a question for you. What differences and implications do you see for Muslim majority countries in South Asia, including Bangladesh and Maldives, in engaging with the new Taliban regime soon? Or would they sort of maintain a cautious distance at first, at least? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think that what religion is in the majority of the countries of South Asia is going to have a different impact on how these countries choose to approach the Taliban government. I think that Muslim and non-Muslim majority countries alike in the region, other than Pakistan, they all feel similarly about needing to be cautious and not recognizing the Taliban because of its troubling ideology and so on. And I think an important point to be made here, you know, it's not like it's just the fact that you're looking at a really brutal regime. It's the reason why so many of these countries are going to be cautious. You know, we know that the way international relations work, plenty of countries engage with brutal regimes, including the United States does that. But you know, with the Taliban, you're looking at a government that not only has a particularly nasty ideology, right? I mean, there's no country in the world, not even Saudi Arabia, that bans girls from going to school as the Taliban has to this point, at least with older girls. And of course, the Taliban also has ties to Al-Qaeda. So that goes further than that. So yeah, bottom line answer to the question is that I think all countries across the board in South Asia, other than Pakistan, regardless of which religion is in the majority, will be very cautious about engaging with the Taliban.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, we have another question for Niva. How have other smaller regional powers like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so forth, how are they beginning to address the Taliban takeover? Is it possible they could serve a stabilizing role going forward, or are they potentially at risk?
Actually, I know that people are usually not very knowledgeable about Central Asia because it's such like the black hole of like the world map. But actually, Kazakhstan is so large that it's almost the size of the entire Europe. So I would be very hesitant to call these countries small countries. But actually, the entire region gone through like different waves of regionalism. And currently, as it kind of got closer to each other because of what's happening in Afghanistan, all these Central Asian states are actually kind of going apart from each other because they don't have consensus about what to do with Afghanistan, despite discussions in the past 20 years. So we have Uzbekistan, which is the most pro-Taliban Central Asian country, because Uzbekistan is undergoing this political transition since the first president, Karimov, died in 2016. And Uzbekistan actually wants to follow this connectivity project all the way accessing the ocean from Pakistan. So Uzbekistan has been very pro-Taliban this year, and there's been several meetings. And the sharp contrast of that would be Tajikistan, because Tajikistan has a very large Tajik ethnic population in Afghanistan, and the president has been quite vocal about supporting those Tajiks in Afghanistan. I think what is more important for this region is the fact that, you know, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has been expanded this year. Iran is going to be, you know, now also one of the most important regional player. I think we talk about Pakistan a lot, we talk about India a lot, we talk about Russia, but also Iran also has a very interesting role. I hope that, you know, in future seminars, I'll get to, you know, listen to someone from Iran as well. And then also, from what I know from colleagues in Iran, is that Iran has, you know, this new policy of looking east. So I think this is not just responding to Afghanistan, but responding to all the changes that's going on in the Central Asian region. And then going back to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we also see that this year there's been new observer states, and that is Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. I think the choices of these three countries to join actually answers to, you know, the fact that with this Afghanistan situation, is the world of Islam is changing, and the world of international terrorism are changing, and all of these countries, you know, want a mechanism to be able to, you know, have access to information, and none of these countries want to be alone in dealing with what is to come.
Okay, thank you for that. For Professor Pant, a question: do you think India needlessly sort of miscalculated by delaying opening the track to diplomacy with Taliban leaders?
Well, I don't know. I think back channel, negotiations have been happening for quite a while now. But I think the assessment, it seems, in New Delhi was that they were not really giving any opening to India to elevate those negotiations to anything more substantive. So while low level official engagements and communications were going back and forth, the message that India was getting was actually not generating any confidence that this is going to lead to anything more substantive than what we already, than what was going on. So I think therefore we saw India largely not taking that, the very frontal engagement with the Taliban leadership that many others did. But I think if you look at the outcome, it seems to me that even those who are leading this engagement today find themselves at a loss to explain what those engagements have actually yielded. China was doing, it still is doing a lot of that engagement. And as Niva was pointing out, it's not entirely evident that yielded direct benefits to China. China is still struggling to find that median way of approaching this question. Similarly, Russians have changed track in the last few weeks itself. So I think we are looking at a phenomena where I think India's assessment was, and which continues to be till this date, has been very much in line with this thought that, look, this is whatever the group may be saying or whatever they may be committing on these, sitting in these 5-star hotels around the world, they are not actually going to, they don't seem to be able to change themselves. And if they're not changing, then for India, that engage, or if that level of engagement was not yielding anything substantive for India, then that it meant that India had to start figuring out something else rather than investing in those engagements. And I think that's what seems to be happening from that front, where India was engaged more with Russia, with the US, and trying to figure out what can it do. I think what caught Americans, and now we are told even the Americans by surprise, is the fragility of the Afghan system, that it collapsed so suddenly. The speed of the collapse was a challenge. But I think for India, there was never any doubt that the challenge that Taliban's coming to power would pose would be of an order that would require a different sort of an approach rather than engagement with Taliban. Of course, that level, the low-level engagement was seemingly seen as not having any major impact on the way the trajectory would unfold post-American withdrawal.
Okay, we have just a little bit more time, and I have a question here for Ambassador Haqqani. What are the long-term benefits for Pakistan to continue to have a relationship with the Taliban, especially if it comes at the cost of increasing isolation from the rest of the world?
Well, if there is increasing isolation, then obviously there won't be any benefit to Pakistan. And people like me have warned about that for a long, long time. We have always argued that this is a bad investment. However, from the point of view of Pakistan's security establishment that has persisted with this, it is a better choice than having an Afghanistan which is ruled by a government that is very close to India and therefore becomes a center for irredentist and separatist movements in Pakistan, including the Baluch and Pashtun nationalist movements. Also, Pakistan thinks that it is too important because of being a nuclear weapons power. It's too centrally located and will not really be fully isolated ever, that people will pressure it. But if it can resist that pressure, then after a few years, people come around to it. Just by way of a quick lesson in history, the United States tried to stop Pakistan from making nuclear weapons, threatened it. Pakistan made nuclear weapons. There was an aid cutoff, but within a few years, the US was back dealing with Pakistan. Similarly, Pakistan was threatened over supporting the Taliban and over Osama bin Laden having refuge in Afghanistan. A few years later, the US was back discussing with Pakistan. Pakistan thinks it has a geographic advantage. As Ms. Yaur pointed out, Uzbekistan, for example, thinking about reaching the sea through Pakistan. So that would basically mean through Afghanistan, Uzbekistan into Afghanistan and Afghanistan into Pakistan and then to the sea, connecting to CPEC, the Chinese project, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So such opportunities from the point of view of Pakistan ensure that it will never reach the level of international isolation that people like me warn about. And the official Pakistani view is that sometimes in the life of a nation, especially a nation that is still in the process of shaping itself, like Pakistan, which is a totally new country cut out of whole cloth. There was no Pakistan in history before 1947. So therefore, we are making a nation. It will take a little time. We pay a few price in a few years of criticism and isolation, but eventually the bigger benefit is Pakistanis think of themselves as Pakistanis, not as Pashtuns and Baluch, do not have linkages across the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, which is also called the Durand Line. And we contain India, which is always, according to their narrative, out to get Pakistan or break it up into pieces.
Thank you. Professor Sumer, I have a question for you. What does Turkey's cooperation with the Taliban regime mean for the relationship between the US and Turkey, considering, of course, that Turkey is a NATO ally?
I think Turkey will try to strike a balance between its, the current government of Turkey will try to strike a balance between its ideological affinity with the Taliban and its relations with the US. It is trying to mend relations with the US at the moment, so it will not actually really sacrifice those. It will try to strike a balance. Just to, I don't know if we will have another opportunity, but just wanted to mention another important issue. I think here, a very important consideration for the world is our understanding of security and terrorism in the future. I'm not very optimistic, but will we see Islamic terrorism? Will we interpret Islamic terrorism, so-called Islamic terrorism, from the point of view of security policies alone, or will we see it as a consequence at the end? It's at the end, it's political violence. Terrorism is a type of it, and it is a consequence, I think, of the failures of more pro-secular governments in the Muslim world in terms of social, economic, and foreign policy. So at the end, and this is for so-called Islamic terrorism, but we can say this for other types as well. At the end, the ultimate solution is that the more pro-government, pro-secular governments in the Muslim world will be able to rekindle socioeconomic development and bring stability and corruption in their respective countries. That's the, I think, ultimate solution to deal with this problem.
Niva, can I come back to you for a moment? Do you think China is going to play a similar role in that Taliban government, with the Taliban government that the US played in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades? Will China basically replace the US? That's a question coming in for you.
Thanks for this question. I lost count how many times I've been asked if China is going to replace the US. A quick answer is no, because China, places a very heavy emphasis on regionalism. It is trying to make Central Asian countries have a consensus with each other regarding what to do with Afghanistan. And this is very evident with the way that China's been talking to Kazakhstan, with the way that China is asking Tajikistan to tone down their kind of opposition towards Taliban. Is China is not comfortable to do anything more unless there are backers in the region who would say, "Well, thank you for China for doing this," blah blah blah. But at the same time, I think, like Russia, China has also been in the past 5 years have been very good at positioning and securing its own border. So just a few examples of the things that China has done domestically, on the border of Xinjiang, bordering Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Most importantly, China has, undergone this 3D mapping of the border regions, which has meant that, whereas in the 90s with Afghanistan, this was something that China would not have been able to do, was to have satellites that were able to actually track movements of people and have kind of ready responses. But this has all changed. There's been the military at the border has undergone reform. And there's been increased combat readiness trainings that could that exclusively targets the incoming cross-border actions of terrorists. There's been more military equipment and deployment of individuals and human capacity towards the border. And overall, the combat condition in those border regions have been raised. So all of these, put China in a very comfortable position, and this is something that Chinese scholars have, repeatedly, kind of reassured its own population that, there's no overspill to China. The concern is that, the concern is more long-term, the future of Islam in Central Asia. One of the, scenario that Chinese scholars paint for this region is that there will be a capture of radical Islam of these Central Asian governments, especially in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where governments are not good performers economically. And all of these populations are looking at the Taliban and think that the Taliban is great at conducting social justice, particularly with corruption. I'm sure that I won't get any more time and any more questions, so I just want to flag this very quickly. Michael got a question about potential US-China cooperation, and at a very high level, I think that this is not going to happen. But we have to remember that both China and US have multilateral organization which can be instruments of cooperation. Of course, the OSCE itself is a very European-centric organization. It is, after all, called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, but US is the biggest donor of the OSCE. And of course, OSCE is not NATO, but we have about, regionally speaking, almost 500 staff who can quickly mobilize in security-related projects, particularly on the border. Which can also, contribute towards Western interests as well. And at the same time, the SCO has repeatedly and many times we have seen SCO approaching us and us approaching them to talk about cooperation. So I think this is an area which can be explored, but the US has to make a commitment to actually empower the OSCE.
Okay, very quickly back to Professor Pant. We can squeeze in one more question and maybe a 30-second answer if you can manage it. You had mentioned SARC, so there's a question for you. Do you think there should be a collective move from South Asian countries under SARC to contain the potential spread of religious extremism by the Taliban regime?
Yeah, thanks, Nirmal. I think Michael mentioned SARC. I have given up on SARC long back, so I don't think they have the capability or the willingness, this particular organization, to do anything substantive. But I think, given that there is a fundamental divergence on this issue between India and Pakistan, I do not see how you can bring, you can make SARC as a viable platform on this particular issue. Okay,
Murad Sumer, Hussein Haqqani, Harsh Pant, Niva Yao, back back to Liz Dawn now. Thank you very much for that, and back to Liz Dawn in Colorado, I believe.
Mahalo, Nirmal, and to all of our panelists, Michael, Neva, Harsh, Ambassador Haqqani, and Murat. The Center was honored to have played host to each of you and to such an informative and timely discussion today. Thank you to our promotional partner, the Straits Times, and to you, our viewers, for attending today's EWC Seminars Live and submitting so many thoughtful questions. Our apologies that not all of them were addressed. We hope you will join us Tuesday, October 12th, for the Future of Women in Afghanistan, featuring Anita Bhatia of the United Nations and Farida Nexad of the Center for Protection of Afghan Women, Journalists, among others. Finally, to everyone from the East West Center, mahalo and aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.